welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of I Chill and Film. I have with me Aisha Malik. As always, she doesn't leave us. And I have today with us a new guest, film critic and entrepreneur extraordinaire, Rahim Khan.
Self-styled,
Rahim Khan. Today we are going to be discussing an old movie, but a really important one. And the only reason we're doing this is because Aisha Malik has just seen Saving Private Ryan.
No, and also because she's a personal friend of the director.
Yes. So Aisha, please tell us, why did you decide on Saving Private Ryan?
So while I was in America on a fellowship, I met Steven Spielberg, who is now my close personal friend.
Yeah.
And I may be his quote-unquote muse.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, for future.
His words, not yours, right?
His words, not yours.
Wonderful.
From my longtime personal admirer.
Version of, Steven
But actually,
Spielberg.
he's already directed E.T. No,
Whoa.
but anyway.
Okay, so then we watched Saving Private Ryan
Yeah.
Right. She had to read
to
her
talk
notes
about
to remember the
Steven Spielberg.
Yeah, and this is why this entire show is happening because
Yeah.
It was a personal
You had
request
to-
by Mr. Spielberg.
critique my movie,
Please.
right? Wonderful. So Aisha, what were your initial views before we get
So
into it?
this movie is quite old. When did it come out?
99, 2000, so it's almost 25 years
So
old.
you know when watching it in 2024, I got the impression that, okay, this must have been one of those genre groundbreaking, kind of genre defining war films.
Mm-hmm.
But because you've watched so many people do the same thing Spielberg did, it loses its effect watching it in 2024. I genuinely felt that's why I didn't have
The film
that
critic
much of
would
an
now
impact
step
with me.
Yeah. No, and Aisha also, I think that this is more of a Aisha problem than anything else.
Because to be perfectly honest, nobody's been able to best this movie. Nobody's been able to replicate it. The reason why it's genre defining is slightly going back to the history. World War II is the gift that keeps on giving, right? In terms of popular culture.
Yeah.
They have been mining it for about 60, 70 years so far. And they will continue to mine it for almost 100 years. Why? Because, you don't see as many World War I movies. Because that was a predominantly French and British problem. The Americans only joined in 1917. But with the Americans in World War II, they were there from 1941 onwards. So it feeds into that mythology of sort of, the greatest generation.
Yeah.
Right? So they were making movies while the war was going on. They were propaganda movies while the war was going on, both sides. The Germans were doing it, the Brits were doing it, the Americans were doing it. So everyone was at it. Why were they unable to ever put D-Day or Operation Overlord onto film?
I think the scale of
The scale of it, exactly. This was the greatest amphibious assault in the history of sort of mankind.
Yeah.
Sort of going back to Troy and stuff like that.
Well, the Chinese haven't invaded Taiwan yet, so
Yeah,
we
but
still have something to look forward to. Right?
I don't think they'll shock and awe them. They'll just refuse them in, particular minerals so that they won't make semiconductors or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
But in this particular case, there you get, the scale of it, number one. And where I'm going to disagree with Aisha on this is that while many lesser directors, he is after all your friend, have tried to emulate Spielberg, no one has come even remotely close.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why this movie will stand the test of time. Forget the Oscars, forget the accolades. That first 12 minutes of the Normandy invasion.
Yeah.
And particularly because, the Americans bore the brunt of it. This was the Omaha beach. And I think they suffered almost about 3,000 casualties.
Yeah.
And the reason why I'm sort of harping on this particular thing is that if you ever check out war photographer Robert Capa, he was there on the beach. Okay, wow. On that day. And if you check out his pictures, those were used as inspiration for this.
Wow.
And that's how accurate that scene was. So, I'm sorry, Aisha. They won't be able to best it.
Yeah, and if you also see something that was made, Band of Brothers, that show, I think.
No, but that was a direct inspiration from this.
Exactly.
Exactly.
Right? It was almost like a sequel or
exactly, because sort of while this was, I'm sorry, I'm sort of hogging the thing.
No, please go ahead.
While this was sort of the amphibious invasion, Band of Brothers was the airborne.
Exactly.
And sort of it ties directly into this because our titular character, Private Ryan, is airborne. Right?
He's easy company.
Exactly. He's airborne. He's 506. So, while the rest of these guys are Rangers, because on that day, because of the inclement weather and whatnot, they were blown off course. So nobody knew where the airborne actually landed.
Okay.
So, instead of landing in sort of LZA or B or C, these guys went to God knows where.
Yeah.
So And even this year, and I'll end on this particular note, is that sort of why this continues to sort of like, inspire. This year we had Masters of the Air. I don't know if any. I
haven't seen
Okay,
that.
so that
No.
was about what's it called, the bombing, the Allied bombing campaign, in particular the Americans.
Okay.
That was done by Apple, and again, Spielberg, Tom Hanks were executive producers on that, and sort of the same production company, they were doing the entire thing. So World War II is going to sort of remain fixated. I mean, you even had Saoirse Ronan in Blitz. That might be a movie you might want to watch. I didn't like it too much.
I haven't seen Blitz, but
yeah, World War II.
actually, that's really interesting. Thank you for the history lesson.
Yeah.
And also, but I agree. I haven't seen. I mean, we've seen, what is it, 1918. We've seen
17.
It's 1917. Sorry.
1917 was fantastic.
Yeah, that was a fantastic
Yeah,
movie. But
yeah.
again, and that had immense scale, but nothing of the level, like the way you feel
Yeah.
that you're in the action, you're on the beach.
Yep, absolutely.
Right? There was not, and at the roughly around that time, you also had that game Medal of Honor that came out, which which you have that level.
Medal of Honor, Allied Assault.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And I remember playing that game, and this movie was just playing, in my mind the entire
Yeah.
time. So it's an experience. Like you feel that, that unvarnished.
I did
brutal-
definitely watch it and think that this is a very masculine movie. Like it is made for a male audience, and especially seeing like the hand-to-hand combat, like especially given the images that we have of war now, we know that that's not occurring, and it's like, damn, men used to go to war, and now they do podcasts.
Wow. Okay. Oh. Can I leave? Can I leave?
Anyway.
I'm not contractually obliged to be here, so I can leave if insulted.
Anyway, Aisha, what were some of the more, from a legal perspective, some of the points that
Yeah.
you wanted to raise on this podcast?
So a couple of the scenes that I noted down was when they were entering. So they were in French occupied territory, and they come across a French family, which is like, take our children, take our children, and then one of the soldiers wants to. And then Tom Hanks drags them away, and he's like, we're not here to do the decent thing, we're here to follow orders.
Boys, get the kid back up there! Captain, the decent thing to do is to at least take her down the road to the next town. We're not here to do the decent thing, we're here to follow fucking orders!
And I was thinking maybe that would count as transferring children out of occupied territory, but you're transferring them within occupied territory. And so it would have to be for security reasons and for their own safety. And so actually taking the children, because they were under bombardment at that time, it might be actually justifiable under the laws of war, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you have so many laws that deal with, say, evacuations
Right.
or trying to get, civilians out of harm's way.
Yeah,
And this was,
yeah.
Straight smack in the middle of harm, right?
Yeah.
And ultimately, the Vin Diesel, I believe it was the character, he is shot by a sniper doing that. It would be completely justified, I think, in those circumstances. What we also see in the thing, and I saw it a long time ago. So one of the scenes is, you have surrendered German soldiers, and they're digging up, their own grave. I've forgotten the context.
So in this particular case, I mean, sort of one of the unit played by Giovanni Ribisi, he's shot. And sort of like, the foxhole that they've just stormed, they happen to have like one or two soldiers walk out. They frog march them out there. And then one of the soldiers, the Germans, is forced to dig a grave. And of course, that's implied that this is your grave. And then sort of it's that moral quandary about whether or not, A, that is right.
Sir, you're gonna let them kill him? This is not right.
You can help me with the bodies.
And B, because the thing is that it's the unit. Half of them say that, yeah, whatever, to hell with this guy. The other half are like, no, this isn't right. We should not be doing this. So
The notion of him digging graves in and of itself is forced labor of POWs, which is not allowed, unless there is imperative military necessity, of course, and this wouldn't qualify as that.
Right.
But also, so he actually had surrendered, right? So he was like,
Yes.
please, I like America,
Yeah.
F Hitler, and then he was saying
Mickey
all of
Mouse
these
and things
things.
like that.
Yeah, Mickey Mouse,
exactly.
like can of
Rock and roll.
beans.
Please. I like America. Fancy schmancy. What a sense. Go fly a kite. Get back your tongue. Cool of beans.
Betty Boop. What a dish. Betty Grable. Nice scams. I say, can you see I say, can you see? I say. Fuck Hitler. Fuck Hitler.
So basically, he had surrendered at that point, but they're like, we can't keep this guy, and so they send him marching blindfolded, and they're like, go over there. There's actually a place that can keep you over there, and let's see if he makes it.
Whether he
You
does or
can't
doesn't.
really keep you have to have, because Geneva Convention 3 is so comprehensive, you do have to have the means to be able to comply with Geneva Convention 3. Marching someone blindfolded and sending them on their way to another camp, I don't know if that would qualify as keeping them within humane conditions. That's definitely not humane under Article 189 of
But
Geneva
in this
Convention
particular
3.
war, which is interesting
Of
to
Additional
know,
Protocol 1.
considering sort of modern day conflicts, the Geneva Conventions were followed, I wouldn't say to the letter, but I mean sort of there were POWs on either side. Because there was like, thousands, I mean sort of, on the Eastern Front, on the Western Front. So I mean, why would, for example, because again, the Nazis, they were painted as sort of like, completely inhumane, beyond reproach, so on and so forth. So why do you think that they would adhere to this? Why would they be so particular about? Because again, yes, soldiers, there were abuses, there were massacres, many of them noted on either side. But I mean, largely, for example, especially when it comes to Allied airmen, if they were captured, they were sent, back to POW labor camps and stuff like that. So why do you think sort of for a regime that is again sort of so demonized, why would they stick to that? Why would they adhere to those codes?
So the rules of law are generally complied with, especially when it comes to the status of POWs, because they hinge on reciprocity, right? This isn't human rights law, which is based on these fluffy notions of dignity of mankind. They're based on reciprocity. If they treat our POWs terribly, we might treat theirs terribly. There is a lot of Hollywood fluff on this, right? In a lot of ways, if you come across the German POW, I don't know how many Americans did act. So they want to show it in a good light in that sense. There have been noted massacres, and also the reputation that the Russians had in the Second World War was of a fierce fighting force. But that was because they faced death. They didn't face detention as POWs. The Germans were slaughtering them and killing them. So that's the reason why they were fighting, with everything that they had.
I would just like to go back to the original part, where we were, our first instance where Tom Hanks's character says that, we're not here for, to evacuate civilians. Generally, sort of under the law, what is expected of soldiers? Because again, these are sort of allied civilians. They are under threat, they're under bombardment. So what is expected of those soldiers?
So what is expected of those soldiers is really not to target them. If they fall into enemy hands, so if
refusing them help, is that, sort of, as he said, I'm following orders, I'm not here to do this.
The obligation would not extend to you having to ensure civilian protection in the form of taking their children that, right? If they fall into enemy hands, and that's the issue with you being in a co-belligerent, they're kind of your civilians, they're allied civilians. So in terms of, you have to take precautions, you have due diligence, constant care precautions towards civilians, but it wouldn't extend to the scenario painted in the film.
And the obligation would really be on the German side here, not to target civilians, to ensure that any of the strategies that they take do not unduly affect civilians and civilian objects, right. But of course, like a lot of the bombings that we saw, whether it was Dresden, whether it was other aspects, right? These were deliberate targeting of civilian things.
By the Allies.
By the Allies, right?
Oh yeah, those
and
were,
of course,
those
because
straight up war crimes.
Exactly, and you saw the Blitz, the bombings of London.
Yeah, exactly.
Complete, those were violations of the laws because they were targeting civilian objects and civilians themselves. So all of that, when you look at it as part of a strategy, if you launch military operations in an area, you should first try to evacuate or at least do leaflet drops, take precautions in that sense. Here, when it comes to that, I want to get back to the POW, who was released. There is an obligation under international humanitarian law that you can't have policies like no quarter. That we're going to go in, no prisoners, we're going to kill everyone. Right? That is completely prohibited. If someone surrenders, you're an obligation to accept their surrender.
Right.
And then take them and neutralize their war-fighting capability temporarily. So that's why you make them a POW.
Right.
And interestingly, POWs, people who are shooting to kill you, you can't try them for a crime. It is their
Okay.
job to shoot you, right? They're soldiers.
Right,
So they have
right.
something known as combatant immunity, right?
Right.
And similarly, your soldiers, if they were to fall into the opposition
Enemy hand, right,
unless
right.
they committed some particular war crime, a grave violation of the Geneva Conventions, they are not under. They can't be tried. So they would simply be kept out of the fight until the hostilities ended and then returned.
I see.
Yeah.
Right.
The rest of the movie, I thought was, other than how realistic it was, I think there were some really interesting parts where, Raheem, I think you were mentioning that, this wasn't really a true story.
No, I mean, it would be completely improbable considering that there are millions of men fighting, for like one particular soldier to be singled out and sort of brought back to the front, even though this was a particular case. I mean, it was the Nyland brothers. There were 4 brothers. All of them, of course, served. 2 of them were KIA, killed in action. One of them was reported MIA, missing in action. So the 4th was then ordered back.
Okay. But
Right?
it was this
Ordered
regular,
back. Yeah, but that was just sort of straight through military channels.
Okay.
But again, this is fiction. They're allowed sort of that sort of poetic
that
license
license is
to, romanticize it to an extent, but also fictionalize something like this.
Yeah.
But I mean, it would be extremely improbable to
Yeah.
have, the entire military apparatus. And considering how important D-Day was, this operation was, to
Send a platoon to
send a
risk their
platoon,
life
send a
to
particular unit just to
save.
find one soldier
Yeah.
in this complete haystack that was the rest of France. And the reason why it was so difficult is because, and I mentioned this earlier, the weather was so bad, is that all of the airborne soldiers, they were completely blown off course. So nobody knew where they were. And that was, for example, if you remember in the second or third episode of Band of Brothers, that was it. Nobody could find out where they were.
Yeah, I think it was a really nice fictionalization because there's something very, and I think you realize this through war movies that you otherwise wouldn't, which is that it is really, there are levels of what you would do for your country, but being willing to die for your country is one thing, and being willing to kill for your country is entirely another.
Right.
The ways in which a state will go, the lengths to which a state will go to, not only defend, but to comfort those who die in its name.
Right.
And I like the whole notion that, she had 5 sons and she lost all of their 4. And so they were like, no, she should have one. She's given them all up for the country. She deserves to have one back home.
Yeah.
And I really like the Tom Hanks bit where at the end he's like, earn it, right? Earn what we've done for you, which is that, and even throughout the movie, he's like, this guy better be worth it.
This Ryan better be worth it. He'd better go home, cure some disease, or invent a longer-lasting light bulb or something.
You better go back and cure a disease. You better go back and do
Cure
something.
cancer.
Get
a PhD.
Yeah,
Matt
literally.
Damon, so-
Yeah.
He was Matt Damon.
And he did eventually go to Mars and stuff.
Yeah, exactly. But knowing him, most of these boomers, they must have sort of joined Ford and sort of done stuff. They built all of these companies practically. So that was a good.
He's also
That was
in,
what he did,
Ford versus
yeah.
Ferrari.
Exactly. So that's a good
He
thing.
did join Ford.
But here are 2 separate questions that I guess apply to international law, but it was just came to me while we were talking. This is not something that you see in Saving Private Ryan, but you do see in Band of Brothers, particularly Collaborators, right? Quislings. In particular, they show the female collaborators, like people, women who eventually had relationships with Nazi officers with Germans, and even had children. Now, this is very well documented, particularly in France, where
And the Netherlands.
And the Netherlands, exactly, where sort of, in a public square, they would be, shave their heads and not exactly tar and feather them, but sort of the equivalent of that.
Yeah.
Is there any provisions for that under international law or war or anything like that?
In this, to the extent that you're intelligence gathering, you are then, if you're a civilian who's intelligence gathering, you're a civilian DPIH. So they're targetable while they're pillow talking.
I see. Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting. I didn't know that.
So and DPH is direct participation in hostilities. So so because you're gathering intelligence for, say, any of the sides, right? So it could be that the woman is a double agent. She's sleeping with a Nazi officer to gain information for, say, the resistance.
Right.
In that sense, she's acting as a spy, and she's targetable. She's helping the war effort in that sense.
Right.
But then somebody who is, say, just cleaning the barracks, she's a cleaning lady or a launderer. Right. That person would not be, because they're not. Their contribution to cleaning uniforms or something is not as significant.
Okay.
Right? So there is a threshold that you have.
There is a threshold,
especially because if you're telling your group tactical information about they're planning this attack,
Yeah, yeah.
they're planning to target this, that is really important
That's-
information.
yeah.
So neutralizing that threat, there's a definite military advantage there. So yeah, you are DPIH and targetable while you're doing
Interestingly, spies who are not in uniform, if they're caught
Yes,
in
yes.
a battlefield, they are not afforded POW status.
Oh, okay.
Right? So,
okay.
they
okay.
so they can be summarily shot.
Yeah.
They can be no
Yeah, yeah.
trial, nothing.
No trial. No. I mean, you would have a summary trial generally.
No, but I mean,
You
be like a
you're
kangaroo court.
convicted, like you're convicted
Yeah,
under your country's
convicted in a-
It would
Espionage
be like a
Act.
kangaroo court type thing where it's sort of like,
Military-
No, I mean, if
military
you're
courts
if
like
you're
that.
spying, yeah, your military court will court martial you under the Espionage
Yeah.
Act, and then
Right.
it can be the death penalty. Going through the proper process.
You're saying these things, but this isn't what happens
No,
in
but-
practice, man.
but,
it does not happen in practice,
But
of
with
course.
spies, if you get caught, you get caught, and you can get caught with quite a bit of evidence on you.
Yeah.
And spying for the other side, yeah, intel gathering like that.
Yeah,
Yeah,
there was
and-
that very famous, I mean, under the Raj, there was that very famous, she wasn't a princess, she was a Nawab.
Mata Hari.
No, not Mata Hari, she was a,
That was
what's it called?
World War II.
Oh,
That was World War One. That was World War One.
Oh, okay,
This
okay.
was again. I don't have
Yeah.
these in front of me, but she was very famously what's it called, captured in France, and she was from the Indian subcontinent and a Muslim lady. I'm forgetting her name. Very famously, and I think yes, she was found in discovered in Paris and yeah,
Killed.
executed. Yes.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. I'm forgetting her name now, but yes.
Yeah. So in that
Dangerous
context,
game.
it is a dangerous game.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And what was you had another point that you wanted to discuss on the international
yes.
law aspect?
Yeah, I think that's kind of slipped my mind now, but I was wondering, in this particular case now, I think we're extending this beyond what's it called, the purview, and I know you're checking your watch because you could be somewhere. But like, for example, you've applied international law to soldiers. So for example, if I'm shooting at you, you're shooting at me again, sort of that's our job. But say, for example, and this was something that you were talking about previously, when you start talking about, so for example, generals giving orders, right? And say, for example, those generals' orders had soldiers massacring civilians. What happens in that circumstance then?
Command responsibility.
Yeah, right.
You're responsible for everything that you
Right.
order people to do. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So the general would certainly be responsible.
And
for
that's
that,
why
right?
Netanyahu and
other
Gallant
right, I was just about to get to
are
that.
accountable, right? It's under command
They're not pulling triggers
responsibility.
themselves, but they're
Yeah.
ordering all the.
They're ordering it for
Yeah.
it to happen.
Yeah.
So the thing is that, for example, we've been talking about the Geneva Convention. We've been talking about sort of combatants in this particular case. Now, I know that you guys split hairs when it comes to international law, but when it comes to, for example, the IDF, right, and Hamas fighters,
Yeah.
right? Hamas, of course, they're designated as terrorists and whatnot. Are they still afforded the same?
No.
Why not?
No POW status for them because that's how Israel is treating them.
No, but for example,
And-
under international law.
So
What
under,
would, under
what do you
international
mean?
law, for example, Hamas fighters are captured.
should they be
Hamas-
given POW status?
Are they given POW?
They're not, no.
Under international law, they're not.
One reason is lack of uniforms and lack of, if you.
They're not a state armed force.
Yeah.
Right.
They're not the Palestinian armed forces.
Right.
So
Yeah.
Right.
if they were, for example, then they would have to be accorded that, right?
Right.
POW. But
Right.
because they're not, they're considered a non-state armed force.
Right.
The other reason is that Israel doesn't want to accord them that
And
recognition in any
resistance
way.
armed forces.
yeah,
Yeah.
And wants to treat them as well. And they also say that this is our territory, or at least it's occupied territory, and there are laws in place, Israeli laws in place, which you violated by
Right.
attacking us and all of those things.
Sure.
And so you are subject to those laws. POWs are not subject to the domestic laws of another state as such.
I see. I
Right.
see. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's really what happens there. Thank you so much. I think this was a great discussion. I'm really happy, Aisha, that you've been able to watch finally Saving Private
Saving
Ryan.
Private Ryan, and there are
We'll
a
be back
boatload
soon.
of other movies that you need to watch as well.
Absolutely. We'll be back soon. Thank you very much for tuning in. Bye.